Last night, Iran launched the deadliest missile attack of the war so far, an attack that threatens to further escalate this conflict. And what you're seeing here is what remains of a neighborhood south of Tel Aviv that was targeted and struck by an Iranian missile in the middle of the night. So today we're going to get into what we know so far about this most recent wave of attacks and new details of Israeli strikes deep inside of Iranian territory as they continue Operation Rising Lion. Now, starting with some statements from senior IDF officials here. One stated that the Iranian ballistic missile strike was the worst civilian strike of the war, involving a large amount of destruction and a warhead containing hundreds of kilograms of explosives. They say that at least 10 civilians were killed and as many as 200 wounded, and that's spread across 2 or 3 different locations in Israel. They say a mass casualty event has been declared at one of the impact sites in central Israel. 4 people who were initially listed as missing in the attacks have since been located and accounted for, while the authorities are still searching for 3 more. The IDF said that upon arriving at the scene, it was actually complex to even get in there because in some spots they had to break through homes or walls of adjacent buildings to get to some of these collapsed areas. Now, as of this reporting, the IDF says they've already been able to locate a fair number of the people that were initially listed as missing. Some, fortunately, are alive. Others, unfortunately, are not. Now, the mayor of this area here, Bat Yam, put out a statement saying that 61 buildings have been damaged in one way or another. 6 of them they will definitely have to demolish. Now, in terms of the overall scope of this attack last night, Iran appears to have launched around 75 to 80 ballistic missiles in 2 separate barrages. So the first barrage of 40 missiles targeted northern Israel. They say 1 projectile struck a home, killing 4 civilians. And the second barrage, roughly 35 to 40 missiles impacted in central or targeted at central Israel. And that's where the one we see here clearly hit in Bat Yam, which killed at least 6 civilians, wounding nearly 200, with another impacting in central Israel, wounding another 40. This is an interesting aspect of modern war. Israel clearly had notification ahead of time. Alerts went out across the country for the civilians to find shelter. And we saw videos early on of these Iranian missiles flying overhead. Some videos from Israeli forces in Syria, actually, was a pretty interesting one. And then, of course, some footage once they enter Israeli airspace. Last night, again, there were clearly some interceptions, but at the same time, air defense never being 100%, does appear that a handful got through. Not mentioned in this IDF statement, I did see some reporting yesterday that there was a coordinated drone and missile attack as well. If that's the case, you would expect the drones to try to distract or chew up some of the attention of the air defense assets, clearing the path for missiles to come through and effectively strike some of those targets. Now, the IRGC did put out a statement talking about carrying out this attack, saying, quote, "In continuation of the joint offensive operation True Promise 3, in response to the evil and attacks of the Zionist regime today, the aim is to target the fuel production facilities of the fighter jets and the power supply centers of the regime with a large number of mobile aircraft and missiles. The offensive operations of the armed forces of the Republic of Iran will continue in a more ferocious and widespread manner if the atrocities and attacks continue." That's kind of what we're seeing, and why I believe we're trending towards escalation here is both Iran and Israel are saying to one another, unless you stop, we're just going to continue and going to double down. And another issue here when it comes to escalation is the nature of the targets that Iran hit overnight. Now, they're saying that they went after exclusively military targets, and all of those strikes were successful. There may have been a fuel depot hit in the Haifa area. It's hard to tell exactly. That would be more of a military target than some of these very clearly residential centers that were hit as well. Of course, we can't know for sure if those residential locations were deliberately targeted, if it was sloppy targeting, as in doesn't matter if that's what they happened to hit on their way over, or if it missed, right? If they're aiming at something a mile, a couple kilometers away, and the missile didn't get there for any number of reasons. Nonetheless, when you start to see civilian casualties like this mount in a war, it does tend to lead towards escalation. This is viewed drastically different by populations and governments than strikes against very clear, overt military infrastructure. Now, to that end, the IDF put out a video earlier today talking about why they're carrying out these attacks, why this operation is needed at baseline. I thought it was interesting. Let's give that a watch.
Iran. the axis of terror, attempting to gain access to a nuclear weapon until we stop them. We revealed the Iranian regime is advancing a secret plan for the technological advancement of the development of a nuclear weapon. Senior nuclear scientists in Iran have been working to secretly develop all components needed for developing a nuclear weapon. In recent months, this program has accelerated significantly, bringing the regime significantly closer to obtaining a nuclear weapon. Documents from the Iranian Nuclear Archive revealed maps and plans to create these weapons with explosive warheads and enriched uranium. In recent years, and more so the beginning of the war, concrete progress has been identified in the Iranian regime's efforts to produce weapon components adapted for a nuclear bomb. By February 2025, Iran had over 7,000 kilograms of enriched uranium, enough for 15 nuclear bombs.
اگر ما بخوایم میتونیم بسازیم.
اگه بخوایم حتما میتونیم بسازیم.
Iran's secret is out, and we will continue to do everything in our power to prevent this regime from threatening our state. For our future, for the world's future.
All right, so I wanted to play that because that's kind of Israel summarizing their why this operation was needed and why it was needed right now. Now, yesterday I was fortunate to sit in a briefing with the IDF spokesperson where they were answering questions about some of these things. My question was about the people of Iran. Is there any effort? Are there any focus areas to try to support the people of Iran that do not support the current ruling regime? Of course, we saw Netanyahu's comment a couple days ago addressed to the people of Iran, saying, now is your time. Fight for freedom. The regime has never been weaker. And in that response, I thought it was something interesting that I wanted to share with you all, where he said the focus here overall is the reduction or the elimination of the immediate threat of Iran not just producing the nuclear weapons in the very near future. He said this was days away, most likely, but also the ramped up production of ballistic missiles. And we're clearly seeing that impact on Israeli cities right now. So they were seeing this exponential increase in Iranian production of weapons that were and have and are right now reaching Israeli cities. When it came the whole conversation around regime change, it's not there. That tends to be a conversation we have in the United States anytime we talk about Iran, because clearly there's an issue with the regime in charge right now with the Ayatollah. But when talking to the IDF spokesperson, that's not on the list really at all. It's eliminating the threats near term and long term, which gets into the continued strikes that Israel has been carrying out in recent days. To that end, the IDF said that throughout the night, Israeli Air Force targeted more than 80 objectives, including the headquarters of the Iranian Ministry of Defense, the headquarters of the nuclear project, and additional targets where the Iranian regime hid their nuclear archive. They say as part of Operation Rising Lion, the IDF struck over 170 targets and more than 720 military infrastructure components in less than 3 days. And we do have quite a bit of footage coming out from the IDF showing the effectiveness of these strikes. And there's something to keep in mind here. Just yesterday, Israel said that they had achieved air superiority over Iran. Those words really mean something. So I think a lot of times we throw that out there as just a broad understanding of the Air Force can do whatever they want. That's not what it means in this case. Air supremacy is one step above air superiority. Air supremacy, for example, is what the United States enjoyed pretty much the entire time in Afghanistan. Especially when it came to fixed-wing aircraft, there was really never any serious threat. Our A-10s could just circle around however they wanted, right? That's air supremacy. Air superiority is one step below that. So I'm saying that to stress that there are still very real threats inside of Iran, even in Western Iran and Tehran, the areas where Israel says they now have air superiority. That does not mean that there are no surface-to-air threats and that new threats can't emerge. It does mean that they enjoy increased freedom of movement throughout that airspace and are, as we've seen today, able to start dropping guided bombs from overhead. That's a big change from the standoff munitions that we've seen in recent days. So at least one of the nuclear facilities that was targeted earlier today, we have some footage from the ground showing a still shot, shows very clearly a GBU or guided bomb unit falling on that structure. With guided bombs, you start to get into some of the penetrator capabilities that are a little harder with long-range missiles. So we should expect to see an increase in bombing runs over some of these Iranian targets, especially in the west and northern portion of the country. And again, kind of the hunting of senior Iranian leadership in and around Tehran. Now, looking at some of the specific targets that were hit by Israel in the last couple days, they said they carried out a strike on facilities for centrifuge production in the Tehran area. They say this was an area where the regime had established a centrifuge production array intended for uranium enrichment to weapons-grade levels. So, of course, all of this directly tied to their nuclear program. They also hit a central research and development facility for chemical materials in the Tehran area. This site was used to produce raw materials for the development of nuclear weapons. A strike on nuclear weapons development laboratories, which they say contained several unique components and projects that contributed to the success of developing nuclear weapons. And then, of course, a strike on the regime's nuclear headquarters. We actually have a video of that as well. And they say the headquarters contained classified materials and infrastructure used to advance the nuclear project. Now, one item worth mentioning here, a concern from the get-go, is as soon as anyone, in this case Israel, begins targeting some of the Iranian nuclear infrastructure, you have to expect that there are protocols to where some of these Iranian leaders are grabbing whatever enriched uranium they can, whatever plans they can, and scurrying off to some unknown location. Right? They want to preserve as much of this as possible. They're not going to consolidate everything right away in one location. And that kind of, unfortunately, to me at least, triggers the idea of the search for weapons of mass destruction that kicked off in 2003 in Iraq. If you remember, it was a couple of years of they've got to be somewhere. We're going to find them eventually. And just kind of the idea that these mobile WMD sites are, it's not something you can take out with aircraft overhead. Getting a little bit of those vibes, as we have no evidence that Iran is moving these materials around. But again, they're not stupid. Put yourself in their shoes. No doubt there's plans to carry that out. Now, it's not just the nuclear infrastructure that's been hit recently. Another major component, as I mentioned, that the IDF spokesperson was talking about yesterday, was going after the ballistic missile array and a lot of these long-range munitions that can have and are being utilized to strike Israeli cities. So yesterday, the IDF put out a statement, or before I get to that, actually, I should mention, we are starting to see a little bit of communication between the IDF and the Israeli government and the Iranian people. Not a ton, but some. And just earlier today, there was a message that went out warning the Iranian citizens to avoid any of these weapons facilities. The IDF Arabic spokesperson posted this. I saw it go out via email, Telegram, Twitter, on their website, a bunch of different ways. They said, quote, "Urgent warning to all Iranian citizens. All persons who are currently in or near the future present in and around military weapons production facilities and their support institutions should immediately leave these areas and not return until further notice. Your presence next to this infrastructure puts your life at risk." So hopefully that will help to mitigate civilian casualties. Again, you have to expect there's going to be some in any conflict, especially as the missiles and drones are flying like they have in this one. But anything to prevent and avoid civilian casualties is a net win. And in this specific case, it also probably benefits Israel long term in the case that there's a lot of the population in Iran that does not support the current regime. A good way to turn those people against or further against Israel is to start killing civilians that are not directly associated with with those in charge. Now, Israel put out a statement here along with a pretty interesting video where they say the Israeli fighter jet struck an underground missile site containing storage tunnels for surface-to-surface missiles and cruise missiles, as well as multiple launch shafts. And in this video, you'll see they added, got a little creative and noted that the two individuals shown in this previously released Iranian propaganda film have been eliminated. They were killed on Friday. They say the site was previously revealed in an Iranian propaganda video and now struck as part of the broader effort to target the regime's surface-to-surface missile array. In the video that was released, the chief of staff of the Iranian Armed Forces and the commander of the IRGC Air Force were both eliminated on Friday and can be seen. I think we played that video when it came out a couple months ago, kind of showcasing, and it's worth watching some of it here, but kind of showcasing the extent of the Iranian underground storage capabilities. So again, we believe that the nuclear facilities are 200-300 feet underground. So stone, reinforced steel, concrete, or steel, reinforced concrete, all of that stuff. And clearly there's some missile facilities and drone facilities, storage facilities underground as well that Israel is going after right now. We don't know how effective this specific strike was, but also raises the question of how many munitions does Iran still have available to continue carrying out strikes into Israel. And we're going to get to that more in a minute here because we have some additional details on that drone strike on day one. You remember, kind of behind enemy lines. Specific purpose of those drones apparently was hitting some of these missile launchers as they were exiting areas like this underground bunker where they couldn't otherwise be hit. Now, yesterday we also did get news that Israel apparently was targeting the head of the Houthi military, Mohammed al-Gamari. It's not clear if that strike was effective. Israel has kind of commented that it was carried out, but nothing on the details of that yet. Nothing from Israel, nothing from the Houthis. The Houthis won't necessarily announce anything right away. They've been pretty tight-lipped, much more similar to, say, Hamas than Hezbollah. Hezbollah tends to announce the death in their ranks very quickly. Hamas sits on it forever and ever and ever and denies it until overwhelming proof is shown. Then they still deny it a little bit more. Now, President Trump continues to try to push towards some sort of peaceful resolution here. It's not clear that that's happening or in the cards at all. Of course, today was set to be the next round of nuclear negotiations. That is not happening. We mentioned in yesterday's video that the Iranians said they're not going to have any talks with who they view as assisting the aggressors in this conflict. But President Trump issued a statement earlier today saying, quote, "The U.S. had nothing to do with the attack on Iran tonight. If we were attacked in any way, shape, or form by Iran, the full strength and might of the U.S. armed forces will come down on you at levels never seen before. However, we can easily get a deal done between Iran and Israel and end this bloody conflict." Kind of an interesting mix here yesterday that hit me. I was trying to keep up with, there were ongoing missile strikes, Iranian missile strikes into Israel yesterday, and I was following that and trying to keep track of those impacts and the casualties and the ongoing Israeli strikes against, the nuclear infrastructure inside of Iran. Arguably, this is one of the most significant military operations in my lifetime, at least. And while I've got one screen of watching that, on the other screen, I have Twitter and X up trying to keep up with updates, and we've got the U.S. military parade in Washington, D.C., which, however you feel about that, so many senior U.S. officials were sitting there in the stands for hours just watching these things roll by, and it felt weird. Like, we have this thing that has the potential to spiral into, not just a regional, but a global conflict transpiring. Again, Iranian nuclear sites getting actively bombed by the Israeli military, happening real time, and at the exact same time. Like, who is in the operations room in the United States? Who's monitoring this? If we've got the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, President, Vice President, Chief of Staff, all those people sitting in the parade stands. It felt weird. Like, I don't know, just there's a big thing happening. I feel like we needed to, and, mind you, we're going to get into this in another video, really kind of dive deep into the U.S. involvement and possible U.S. involvement here. We do know that U.S. forces are actively intercepting Iranian drones and missiles, but to that end, we are constantly concerned that Iran or some of their proxies may begin carrying out attacks against U.S. forces in the region. Remember, one of the things that didn't lead to this, but a precursor to all of this, was the United States putting out evacuation orders for a couple of our embassies, saying we have people in the Middle East that are at risk. And, those service members that are actively shooting down, intercepting those munitions, that is a defensive role, right? They're not attacking Iran. They're trying to prevent Israel from being hit. That doesn't come without risk. So we'll dive into that deeper. That deserves its own video, kind of a deep dive on what the U.S. is doing today and what to expect going forward. But the last big item I wanted to bring up here was around the drone attacks. So if you remember, right when this operation kicked off, we got news that Mossad had kind of snuck into Iran and was carrying out short-range drone attacks against significant Iranian assets. And the Wall Street Journal is now reporting on that with a few additional details. They say before Israel's F-35 jets attacked Iranian nuclear and military targets, a secret Mossad operation had already laid the groundwork by smuggling in drone components to strike from inside of Iran. For months, Mossad used suitcases, trucks, and cargo containers to move parts for explosive quadcopters and remote-fired munitions into Iran. Small covert teams assembled the drones near the missile sites and air defense positions. When the Israeli air assault began, these teams neutralized key systems and hit launchers as they emerged from shelters. The operation helped blunt Iran's retaliation and showcased how off-the-shelf tech can bypass even advanced defenses. Just weeks earlier, Ukraine had used a similar tactic to strike Russian air bases. So a couple keynotes. We just don't have a lot of information on those remote-fired munitions. The way they present it makes it sound like it's something separate from the drones. So I would love more details on that. Doesn't look like we're going to get those for a little while at this point. But again, I just want to stress, I hope we're paying attention here in the United States, not just that this type of attack can, like in this situation, we could be Israel or Iran in the sense that, do we have the capability of carrying out this type of attack against enemy aircraft? That'd be great. I hope we're learning from Assad and how to carry this thing out and learning from Ukraine and how they carried theirs out. At the same time, in these same conversations, we are also Russia and Iran in the sense that we have these very expensive aircraft and military equipment relatively static here in the United States, and we have to be able to protect against somebody else doing that exact same thing. And I don't know, hopefully people smarter than me are paying attention to that and coming up with adequate countermeasures. They say Mossad's drone teams targeted missile convoys and storage bottlenecks, reportedly destroying dozens of launch trucks and delaying Iran's counterattack. They say the covert drone campaign, years in the making, involved training operatives abroad, infiltrating supply lines, and identifying top targets. Also very interested in that training operatives abroad. There's a couple different ways you can read into that. One is, were they training people inside of Iran? That's a possibility, right? We haven't really heard anything about infill or exfil of Mossad agents talk about a risky operation being in Iran as this is carried out. Is there also, you have to also have the possibility that maybe there was some training with Ukraine. If you wanted to carry out some sort of FPV drone operation and you needed to learn from the best, there's one place you would go right now. If you're Israel, you go to Ukraine. Other countries like North Korea and China would probably go to Russia. But that is the bleeding edge, the tip of the spear when it comes to how to operate, assemble, and fly these drones. So when they start talking about training operatives abroad, it does raise the idea that there may have been some, not necessarily Ukrainian involvement, but assistance with the training. They say the teams watched as Iran rolled out missiles, then hit them before they could be erected for launch. Mossad knew the trucks that moved the missiles from storage to the launch site were a bottleneck for Iran, which had 4 times as many missiles as trucks. It's a key component here. So what they're getting at is, say Iran has 100 ballistic missiles that they want to fire at Israel in a night. In that case, they have 25 launch platforms or trucks that can pick those up. So you could go after the missiles in the storage site, or you could go after the launch platforms and knock those out, and that's exactly what Mossad did. They knew that as the bottleneck. They knew some of the areas these trucks were going to be transiting. Again, long-term intelligence gathering to know exactly where these vehicles were going to be and when. And as soon as they popped out from that tunnel, right, no need to go all the way down underground, just hit that truck. And one by one, you can pretty significantly degrade the Iranian ability to respond, which is likely why it took a while for the initial response. But of course, we have now seen that Iran clearly does have more capabilities that they have protected, probably underground, and are utilizing those to attack Israel today. A key component here about why this information was released, same questions when Ukraine attacked the Russian airfields. They quote an Iranian or an Israeli source here saying, quote, "No one in Iran in the high echelons can be sure he isn't known to Israeli intelligence and won't be the target. It's not just the damage caused, but the nervousness it brings." So a little bit different in how this plays out between Ukraine and Russia, where Russia is able to clamp down a lot more right now in a lot of the country than Iran is against Mossad. So it raises the question of what is still here? Are there any more? How did they find these people? Do they know where everybody else is currently operating? Again, there's a degree of that with Ukraine and Russia, but right now it's a pretty free and loose environment inside of Iran with so many of their leaders taken out. So Israel viewed it as appropriate and actually a benefit to release that information and keep the remaining IRGC officials on edge. But that's all I got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.